Timothy Snyder, excellent historian and a great friend of Ukraine, he published another article. It is about American policy to war-torn Ukraine, and I would like to share it with you. As usual, the link to the article will be in the description, so you can read it for yourself if you would like to. Okay, recoup the cost, the sadism of American policy to war-torn Ukraine. The premise of American foreign policy to Ukraine today is one of grievance. As the American president, vice president, and national security advisor constantly repeat, Ukraine, the victim of large-scale and criminal Russian invasion, must recoup the cost to the US taxpayer for aid received under the Biden administration. It is worth patiently considering the proposition. It reveals little about Ukraine, but much about America in February 2025. First, the American demand is of an extraordinary scale. In Kiev and again in Munich, the Americans propose that Ukraine concede half of the profits from its mineral rights in perpetuity and from other national resources and from its ports in perpetuity with a lien on everything important, meaning that they were saying about 50%, but it means that actually everything will be paid first to United States. It is not 50%, it's half, it's 100% until these 500 billions are not paid. And this is just extraordinary demand. And in Munich, they were saying to Zelensky, either if you don't sign this idiotic deal, it's not deal, it's just extortion, vice president will not meet with you. It was just blackmail. And Zelensky said no, and vice president met him, meaning never give in to this blackmail and extortion. And whatever Trump said, just say that he is a crazy buffoon and refused to listen until he came to his senses and start saying something productive. This is, in perpetuity with a lien on everything important in exchange for essentially nothing. This is not really a monetary proposition, let alone a deal, but rather the demand that Ukraine become a permanent American colony. It amounts to blackmail enabled by ongoing Russian invasion. So they see that we are in a bad situation because we have to fight Russians, and they try to profit from it. In effect, the United States is telling Ukraine to concede its resources to United States under the threat that American aid will be otherwise withdrawn and those resources will be taken by Russia. Second, Ukraine is currently under attack by the Russian Federation, which invaded its south and southeast in 2014 and then began a full-scale invasion in 2022. For 3 years, Ukraine has resisted the largest offensive in contemporary history. The American demands amount to extremely severe war reparations upon Ukraine, far more severe than was demanded, for example, of Germany after the Either World War. But this demand is directed against Ukraine, and Ukraine is not the aggressor. Russia is the aggressor. Ukraine is the victim. Until now, the discussion in the United States and elsewhere was the reparations that Russia, as the aggressor state, should pay. That would be the historically normal discussion. It would also be the strategically normal discussion, in that it raises the cost of war to the current aggressor and to future aggressors. The demand that Ukraine pay a huge sum to the United States is contrary to any logic of ending the war. For the war to come to an end, the aggressor, Russia, must be weakened and the defender, Ukraine, must be strengthened. If the United States were to demand the heart of Ukraine's economy in the middle of the war, the opposite would be achieved. Ukraine would be weakened and Russia would be strengthened. This escalates and lengthens the current war and makes a wider war more likely. 4. Even if we consider the American demand in terms of other than as colonialism, reversed war reparations, or war mortgaging pro-Russian intervention, even if we regard it on its own terms as a repayment of American aid, this would be contrary to usual practice. When one country chooses to aid another country, it is understood that this has its basis in the interest of the first country. In any event, one cannot provide an aid and then later claim that it is a loan that has to be paid back again. And then, again, this deal is very murky. You concede these rights but to some unknown entity who will be profiting from that. I think Elon Musk. I think it was for lithium that he needs. He wanted this lithium and he pushed it through current administration. So I think American taxpayers won't see anything from this deal if it had been signed. Everything will go to the oligarch Elon Musk who bought your president for $300 million contribution to his campaign. These, political action committees should be abolished in American politics. They allow individuals, very wealthy individuals like Elon Musk, to buy your politicians easily for pennies, for some peanuts for them. And it opens, the possibility to other actors, to foreign actors to buy your politicians. This is, why you are accepting this, it is unthinkable. I cannot think. I know that there was, what this case was, Citizens United case that in the Supreme Court that allowed for these political action committees, but it should be dismissed. Five, the price that the Americans use to characterize what is owed them, 500 billion, is both too low and too high. It is far less than the value of the perpetual claim to Ukrainian resources that they are making right now. So, meaning that in this deal, so-called deal, there was a monetary 500 billion, but there were no time limits for that. So for many, many years ahead, it might be much bigger sum than 500 billion. And it is far more than the United States has given Ukraine. The US has committed over 3 years about 66 billion in humanitarian aid and about 119 billion in military aid. So note the word committed. When Trump is saying that Zelensky says that half of the money was stolen or something like this, he intentionally lies and distorts what was said. Zelensky said that from the committed resources, Ukraine has received only half. And not that they received the full amount and half disappeared somewhere. And this language, they have to pay, fuck you. Nobody will pay you nothing. That second figure has to be examined a bit critically. Most of the money stayed in the United States, financing American factories in America and paying American workers. The rest of it was usually not money at all, but weapons to which were assigned a dollar amount for accounting purposes. Most of the weapons that were actually sent to Ukraine were obsolescing and would never have been used by the United States in a conflict. Instead, they would have been dismantled and thrown away at cost to the United States taxpayer. Even if we take the American official price tag, we are looking at 185 billion, not 500 billion. And the true figure would probably be closer to a total 100 billion spread over 3 years. So like 33 billion a year. It is important to keep these numbers in perspective. 185 billion or 100 billion is a lot of money. But over the course of 3 years, the largest war fought since 1945, it is not a huge sum. It is far less than the Ukraine have paid themselves. It is markedly less than Europeans have granted to Ukraine, and they, of course, are not now demanded it to be paid back. Because Trump lied that that we Americans gave it for free, but the Europeans it was a loan and they will be paid back. No, it was grants as well. It amounts to about a nickel on the Defense Department dollar, and it is by far the highest performing nickel on the Defense Department dollar. It is about a penny in the US budget dollar. It is not even a nickel, because we have this 100 million was spread in the... so you have to... It's not nickel, it's like 3 cents. If you divide it into 3 years. It is about a penny on the US budget dollar. The cost to the United States of the Iraq war were at least 20 times higher. The amount of US aid to Ukraine, a country of 40 million people fighting alone the largest war since 1945, is less than half of the personal wealth of single US taxpayer, Elon Musk. In fact, the increase to Musk's wealth since Trump was elected president 3 months ago is greater than all of the American aid given to Ukraine over the last 3 years. Musk could personally pay an annual share of US aid to Ukraine and still be the richest man in the world. All these various comparisons suggest the United States is a huge economy with a huge governmental budget. We can be generous and make a decisive positive difference in the world history at a cost that we do not even notice. 7. It was reasonable of the Biden administration and of Democrats and Republicans in Congress these last 3 years to believe that aid to Ukraine served American interests, no matter how narrowly these interests might be construed. No American soldiers have fought in a war of this scale against an enemy of this kind. Ukrainians have taught Americans a great deal about how modern warfare is fought, and Ukrainians have used American weapon systems to greater and different purpose than their original design. Rather than sitting on shelf in US warehouses and being thrown away, these weapon systems have undergone an audit on the battlefield, generating extremely valuable information for Americans. Ukrainians have also developed their own weapon systems, items that do not exist in the United States, but which in future, assuming Ukrainian victory and an alliance with the United States, would be shared. In even the narrowest military terms, the investment in Ukraine more than recouped its cost. The security and economic gains for the US from the investment in Ukraine, however, were far broader. Ukraine kept the conflict local, thereby prevented global economic instability and financial losses that would have been incalculably greater than the sums discussed here. Ukrainian resistance to Russia, coming as it did at the end of the COVID era, was one of the preconditions for global economic recovery. The Ukrainians have essentially fulfilled the entire NATO mission, absorbing the force of the entire Russian army on their own, and sparing others, including the United States, the far greater cost of a larger war. By holding off Russia, the Ukrainians have also deterred Chinese aggression in the Pacific, by demonstrating just how costly and difficult offensive operation can be. Until 2022, that was the most feared scenario for a global war, the cost of which in human and financial terms would have been orders of magnitude greater than US aid to Ukraine. Should the United States continue its policy of weakening Ukraine and strengthening Russia, all of those costs stupendously greater than the cost of aid to Ukraine, will have to be paid by Americans. 9. It is morally grotesque during this war to put imagined American grievances first. The American taxpayer has helped Ukraine tremendously and has every reason to be proud. A very modest amount of aid has changed the history of the world. Americans have every right to be proud of the humanitarian aid that has allowed Ukrainians to live and to rebuild, and to be proud of the performance of their weapon systems and of the significant differences that they have made in this war. Ukrainians are grateful, and their officials always make public acknowledgement of the value of US assistance. In Ukraine itself, civilians applaud when they catch sight of what they think is a US system. But the cost of this for Americans has been only financial, and that cost has been recouped already 1,000 times in economic stability and national security. The cost of war to Ukrainians, however, are of a completely different nature. They have lost tens of thousands of children kidnapped by Russia. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian soldiers have been injured. Tens of thousands have been killed. People under occupation suffer mass torture. Cities have been totally destroyed, and yet, at the same time, Ukrainians rebuild. And they fight as best as they can against odds thought to be impossible. Ukrainians rebuild, as I have seen for myself in 5 trips to the country since the full-scale invasion began. They take responsibility during an impossible situation. For this, they deserve our respect and our support. 10. This whole business of cost affair is a carefully designed information operation. It is a fact widely known and exploited that Donald Trump has a personal fear of being ripped off. This non-vulnerability is visible when he speaks about Ukraine with a sense of personal grievance or with other high emotion. This weakness is, one must fear, exploited by Putin and others who wish to direct American policy. Unfortunately, in an oligarchical system in which emotions can have a decisive effect on policy, this approach has been very effective. It is possible that Trump has also been convinced, in some larger sense, that Ukraine is simply a vulnerable colonial territory that can be carved up as in the redivision of a plot of property in a real estate transaction. The attempt to run the world this way, though it may appeal to Trump's personal worldview, will lead to much less American power overall. Should it lead to Russian victory in Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, this will be a moment of historical weakness undeniably attached to Trump and others pursuing the current policy of wartime sadism against a loyal and important ally. Thank you for watching. Till next time, and Slava Ukraini!